Good morning. We are talking about atheism today, according to our book here, Fast Facts for False Teachers. We're going to go through just the very basic arguments that they give here in the text, which are very basic. And then we're going to go into a couple of extra arguments for the existence of God. And I'm also going to post a link to our Facebook page from a website called Mind Matters, where a person actually says that you can show scientifically that the arguments for God are scientific. They're as scientific as any other argument that we might make. It's funny that people will oftentimes say that Christianity is backwards or not scientific, when in reality when we talk about proving anything is, according to some scientists, impossible. So when somebody says, oh, well, it's ridiculous, you can believe in God or whatever, well, in reality, it's actually it can be argued for scientifically, even though you can't prove the existence of God in the fullest sense. So let's look at this book here. Let's begin with some prayer, and we'll get started. Father, thank you so much, Lord, for this time we get to have to study. We pray, Lord, that you would help us to have humility, help us to understand the opinions of others and the beliefs of others so that we can reach them with your truth. And we just pray, Lord, for humility. And we're not looking to make ourselves better than anyone. We're not looking to try to make anybody feel bad. We just want to understand so that we can help people see the need for you in their lives. In Jesus' name, amen. So you'll see here, there's a little bit of straw man argument going on here, and you'll see this a little bit in this text, just because this is fast facts. It's not their fault that they're doing that. This is fast facts. This is the bare minimum of information so that you can get the facts fast. That's the point. That's why the book's called Fast Facts. So they're when you're reading it, you're gonna realize that very quickly that some of their arguments are very shallow, but that's because they're just intended to be very quick. So if somebody comes and says, oh, well, I'm Buddhist, and you can go, oh, well, jeepers, and you can read the chapter on Buddhism. And if you read the chapter on Buddhism, specifically on the description of and the belief system of Buddhism, for the most part, it's accurate. It's very accurate. It's exactly what it should be. It's just fast facts about it. Gives you the basics, who Buddha was, what does it mean, the enlightened one, blah, blah, blah. And just gives you the little bit of the backstory. But if you want to understand it better, it would require having conversations with an actual Buddhist. And my hope is that as we study these different belief systems, that maybe you will get comfortable with having those conversations. So first of all, atheism. They begin with, it is philosophically impossible to be an atheist. Since to be an atheist, you must have infinite knowledge in order to know absolutely there is no God. It depends on what they mean by philosophically impossible. These guys are not philosophers, so I don't think they grasp, or I understand what they're saying. I think they're saying it's logically maybe impossible to know that atheism, and that is accurate. But what an atheist would say is they believe atheism is true. They wouldn't say, some of them would, but they're not necessarily saying, I know it's true, because to say I know it's true would mean that somewhere, that you're not ignorant of anything. And now, again, so my argument, and this would be something I've said to people when they've said, I know there's no God. And I'll say, well, let's just take a step back a little bit and think about that. Okay. There's no God. Well, do you have complete and utter knowledge of everything that's ever happened in history? Well, obviously not. I mean, do you have even complete and utter knowledge of the shirt you're wearing, or how many hairs are on your head? Well, obviously not. I said, so I've actually asked this, and I said to this one person, I said, just hypothetically, how much of the world's knowledge do you hold? and they couldn't give me a number. So I said, let's be really generous. And let's say you have 2%. Well, you don't, but let's just say you have 2% of all of human knowledge, or how about all of universal knowledge? I said, is there any chance that God may be hiding in your 98% ignorance? And then the guy very nicely had to go, well, I mean, I guess. And I'm like, okay, then you don't know you don't know there's not a God. You believe there's not a God, and that's fine. And I think that's what they're trying to say here, is that they not that they know it, but let's be honest, they believe it. They believe it. And if a person says, I know without a doubt, same thing with a Christian. We have to be very careful with our language as well. We oftentimes will say, well, I know there's a God. Well, do you though? And people would give reasons like, well, I almost died, or I had an epiphany, or I saw an angel or something, or whatever. At the end of the day, your knowledge means nothing because it's not repeatable more normally. And let's say that you had an angel visit you or something crazy. Crazy people have had angels visit them. The prophet Muhammad said he had an angel visit him. The prophet for the Mormon religion, Joseph Smith, said that he was visited by an angel. And I believe they probably were. I would say that they were demons, not angels. But the point is that just because you were even visited by an angel doesn't mean anything. Paul says very specifically that even if an angel of the Lord comes and tells you something's false, or tells you something that is false, you shouldn't believe it. That contradicts the gospel. So let's try to be humble. Let's try to be respectful and understand that the average atheist is going to say they believe God doesn't exist, that they don't know it. And he gives the reference to Psalms 14:1, where the fool says in his heart, there is no God. I firmly agree with that. I think that that's, it's a silly thing to say when, as we'll see in a little bit, there's lots of evidence for the existence of a higher power. So it says here, Romans 1:18 through 25, and he says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against the godlessness and wickedness of man, blah, blah, blah. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images of mortal man and animals. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worship creation instead. And that, I believe, is absolutely accurate. And that's important for us to recognize that when we're trying to help people understand the logical idea of God, or trying to just point to the creation, or just creation itself, is going to be one of our greatest assets, because we all share creation. These are things we all can agree on. If you try to convince your atheist friend that Jesus is real because you had an epiphany, or you had a really crazy dream, that's not convincing for most people. They wouldn't consider that to be any kind of an argument, because who cares? You could be lying. But if you take somebody outside and you can point to something and go, hey, let's look at this, then you have something to talk about. So he says here, so he gives some arguments. He says, first of all, there's the argument from creation itself. He says, revealed through creation. Psalms 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky proclaims the work of his hands. Absolutely. And then the one guy, Ron Carlson, was speaking at a university to some physics students, and some kid says, I don't believe in God, and he says, okay, fine, here. He says, he says, you like this watch I'm wearing? And the kid goes, okay. And he says, I took a shoebox, filled it with a bunch of junk, and I shook it for weeks and weeks and weeks. At the end of those weeks, all the junk in it became a watch, and now I'm wearing it, and it keeps perfect time. It's awesome. And the kid says, well, obviously that's stupid. And he says, okay. He says, so something as simple as a watch, you don't believe could happen by chance, even when I put all the pieces together. He says, and yet you're going to argue that my eye with 3D vision and color and a retina and all these different things, that happened by accident. or your hair or your skin or your brain, the synapses in your mind. He's just making the point that, you will happily say that that's ridiculous. You will look at a watch and go, there's no way a watch happened by accident. And if you guys have been at the church for any length of time, I've made this argument before, which is even more simple. So I say that if you're going down, imagine you're going down the road, you're going down a path on a trail and you're hiking and you see a path. And so the path is, the path is kind of windy, kind of does this, right? So the path's kind of windy and people will see the path and everybody recognizes the path was created by a person. No one's debating it. Is lined with gravel. It just is. But now imagine that there are some rocks, just some random rocks. Just random rocks put in a line. So no one's going to debate the trail. No one's going to say the trail just happened by accident over millions of years of development, and that's fine. We're not arguing about that. But I'm talking about 5 rocks. 5 rocks that happen to fall into the path. If you see the 5 rocks and you ask a person, any rational human being, how do you think those rocks got there? 99.999% of people will say, well, obviously someone lined those rocks up in a row. Those are just rocks in a line. And we will all recognize that those rocks were laid there by an intelligent being, that the deer didn't push those rocks into a line, that some squirrels didn't push those rocks into a line, that nothing living pushed those rocks into a line except for maybe something intelligent. And when you can see 5 rocks and recognize intelligence, my argument would be, if you can see intelligence in 5 rocks, you should be able to see intelligence in your own creation or the creation of the world around you. So another great example, I did this when I was in, I was at taking law classes at the University of Wisconsin. And one of my classmates was a very avid atheist. We were at a restaurant and I had a professor in the class and we were all having dinner together after class. It was a night class, or maybe we were having before class. I don't remember. Anyway, so on a napkin, I wrote this. And so I said, here, how about this? I said, here. I said, if you found some bricks, I said, out in the woods, just sitting in a pile like that with mortar and brick, I said, just sitting on the ground, would you say that happened by accident? Everything that's in the bricks can be found outside. Everything within the bricks, it's just hard dirt filled with different kinds of dirt stacked up. I said, would you ever claim that was created, or that happened by happenstance, just by natural selection? Like the dirt and the trees and the sun somehow developed that pile of bricks. And he says, obviously not. Obviously not. How could that possibly be the case? And then I did this. I said, now that's the cross section of a leaf with the cells and the nuclei. So you're telling me that a tree happened through evolution, like it naturally happened by happenstance, by chance. But 2 seconds earlier, bricks, you wouldn't recognize bricks developing over millions of years. But now you're going to tell me that something as sophisticated as the machinery of a single cell stacked on top of each other to create the cross section of a leaf, that you will argue with a straight face that happened by chance. And then I said, now imagine your eye. Now imagine your skin cells. Now imagine human consciousness, like how that developed, the idea of free will, like all those things happened by happenstance, but 2 seconds earlier, you wouldn't recognize some bricks were happened by accident. That is a real, in my opinion, that's a good argument. And then he walked away, and that kid said to me, he said, "Hey," he says, "I have no answer for that. Let's talk some more about it." So that would be an argument for God's existence from creation. It would be like the watchmaker argument, an argument from design. Then there's another argument he gives here, page 18. He says the desire to know God. And he says Romans 1:18 through 25 says that everybody has this innate knowledge of God, this information about God. And then he says the fallacy of atheism is shown in the fact that when people declare there is no God, instead of worshiping nothing, they always find something to worship. He says man has a spiritual desire for God, which he will either fill with the true God or a false God. And this is universally observable. Universally observable, this is absolutely true. This sounds like a very strong argument, or maybe a little over the top, but it's absolutely true. Every culture that we have record of, every single culture has religion. There is no atheistic culture that we have that is purely atheistic ever in the history of mankind. So we naturally do have a need to worship. Now, there are psychological arguments for why we developed those things, and that's not the conversation we're having, but it's actually deeper than this. So he says that Romans teaches that we have this innate knowledge of God. C.S. Lewis had a really good argument, and C.S. Lewis said, any desire you have, whatever the desire is, has some fulfillment in the world. Why else would you have the desire? Now, those desires can be corrupted. So if you have sex is a desire. If you decide to pursue sex through rape or molestation or something, you've corrupted something. That doesn't change the fact that initial desire was good. The initial desire was to procreate, to create children, to do that. The desire for hunger. Now, a person can overeat to the point where they get diabetes, or they don't eat well, or whatever, and they lose a leg, or they just die from a heart attack. It doesn't mean that eating is bad or that hunger is bad. The desire had its natural fulfillment in food, but we've abused it to the point where now we're, dying from diseases due to. It's funny with COVID, people are freaking out, which is understandable. Hundreds of thousands or millions of people dying from COVID, but the number one killer in America, without a doubt, anybody with a cell phone and Google can search it, is obesity. Obesity is the number one killer. It's the number one killer because it causes all of the diseases at the very top of our death chain, completely preventable. But we're very concerned, and it's important. But we have to recognize the fact that there's a desire there, and for the sake of the argument here, the desire to live is a good desire. A desire to eat, hunger is a good desire, and the desire for sex is good, procreation and connection to somebody who's special to you. Excuse me. And they can be corrupted. So, and this is the argument that C.S. Lewis makes, and I 100% agree with it, every human being has the desire to be a part of something larger than themselves, to be a part of something greater and bigger. And we see this desire play itself out in every culture in human history having religion. So logically, this is scientific. This is not me projecting my personal faith on anything. Just saying, if a desire at its core has some kind of fulfillment, it does, through inference, make some logical sense that if every single human being on the planet, every single culture in the world is trying to find something to invest their lives in that's bigger than themselves, that's some kind of movement or some kind of purpose, and then historically it's been expressed through religion, it makes sense that there might be something that is literally in the world somewhere that fulfills that need, that fulfills that desire for that connection to a God. And that's the argument that he's making there. We all have this innate desire to know God. And if there is a desire, it makes sense that the desire has some kind of fulfillment. Again, the desire could be corrupted, but the basic desire is good. God in human history. I'll read this. I do not find this argument to be very inspirational or good, I guess, because I'm thinking of this from the perspective of trying to reach an atheist. I'm trying to reach an atheist. And if I say history is his story, that's not convincing to anybody. If I say that God split time from BC to AD, it's very easy for us to look at history and see that God didn't do it. Human beings did. And it's not actually broken well. It's not broken up with the birth of Jesus. It's actually off by a couple hundred or 100 and some years from the time Jesus would have been hypothetically born. So, what if God had, what if we were holding to a different calendar? I mean, in China, they hold to a different calendar. They don't hold to the BC AD calendar. So does this argument work in China? No, it doesn't. And that's my point, is that these are not good arguments for an atheist, because the atheist doesn't even recognize your foundation here. God doing these things. Now, he does give a very good gospel message, which I appreciate from this part. So he says a dad and a son are walking down a path. They see an anthill that's been stepped on. And the little boy says to his dad, "Dad, if only we could go down to the ants and help them and take care of them." And the dad says, "Well, we'd have to become ants to do that. We'd have to become ants to speak their language and to live, and for them to trust us, we'd have to live like an ant." And that's a good argument for the sake of just trying to help people understand the gospel. Like, why would Jesus come? Why would God send Jesus? And that's a good example, because God sent, Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. He comes down and he lives like us. He speaks our language. He wears our clothes. He has to use the bathroom. He has body odor. He has all the human functions that we have. And he was tempted just like we were. And so that section there, even though I don't think it's a good section as far as trying to help an atheist come to grips with the reality of Christ, at the very least, you can pull from there this concept of trying to understand why God would send his son. And then if you do have an atheist friend and they want to know why God would send his son, great argument. That's a great way to explain it with the ants, trying to explain how do we talk to ants without freaking them out. We'd become an ant. That'd be the best way to do it. And then also revealed in the book. So this one here, again, I don't consider this to be a very good argument, because it says that basically you're arguing for the legitimacy of God based upon the Bible saying that he is. Now, there's good reasons to trust the Bible as a historically accurate document, no doubt. As far as by comparison to every other religious document on the planet, that goes to the Norse gods, to Buddhism, to Islam, all the different Mormonism, the Quran, all those different texts. By comparison to the Bible is 100% better. No, not 100%. That's exaggeration. It is significantly, scientifically and statistically significantly better documented and based in history. We have more supporting and collaborative evidence for the Bible than we do every other book. So, for example, like Homer wrote the Iliad. Well, that's what people tell us, but we only have a handful of the texts of Homer. So it's an assumption that he wrote it because it says he did, but we don't have any other text to back it up. With the Bible, though, on the other hand, we have thousands and thousands of copies of some of the books of the Bible. And from the period they were written, sections of it. So the Bible is very good, historically accurate book. Every time the archaeologists go out and they do more research, they end up proving the Bible to be true again and again and again. There was a long time where atheists and archaeologists denied the existence of King David and King Solomon for decades, hundreds of years and decades later, even into the 1900s. But in the 50s, if I remember correctly, it was the 50s, archaeologists found inscriptions from a conquering nation talking about how they had conquered King David of Israel. So in that situation, the conquering nation has no reason to lie about this king they conquered and to make this false history to argue for the existence of King David. So that's evidence for King David's existence. And then since then, we found so much more. We found proof of Solomon. We found proof of Pontius Pilate. We've found proof of all these different characters and these side characters in the New Testament. So every time the archaeologists dig a little bit deeper, they just end up proving our point. It is historically accurate, archaeologically accurate, geographically accurate. And it's consistent and there's unity to it, even though it has, as he says here, 40 some different authors, 1,500 years of time it was written. So again, is that a good argument for God's existence to an atheist? Probably not. Is it a good argument for the trustworthiness of the Bible? Absolutely. So that is going to be what he has to say about this. And so I'm going to go on with a couple of points these two authors don't even touch on. And these are arguments for the existence of God. I'm only going to look at the very basic ones. And then I'll throw in a bonus one right now. There's one argument for the existence of God called the argument for the existence of God from genocide. And this is an argument that is the foundation of this argument is that everyone recognizes that genocide is inherently evil. Genocide would, when genocide is done, it kills everybody. That's what the word genocide means. And everyone recognizes that it's evil. Everybody recognizes that if everybody commits genocide, the entire world ends up dying. Genocide is bad. And if genocide is bad, then there's some kind of moral code. And that's where we get to the moral argument. There are lots of different moral arguments. There's lots of different arguments for the existence of God based upon morality. What war did King David lose? Lots of them. The armies of King David, we only have references in the Bible of a handful by, just basically a handful. And King David lost wars for sure. We know for a fact that his son took over the kingdom and he was fleeing and probably being the entire time back. So there's lots of wars. Also, too, history has taught us that the people generally write down their victories, but don't record their losses very often. And there's also an entire book that we don't have that the Bible mentions often called the Wars of the Kings, if I remember correctly. So there's lots of wars that we're not aware of. But yeah, King David lost a battle. I don't remember who it was to. But anyway, moral argument is basically just saying, okay, if there is morality at all, how do you get morality if you're not created? So it's a very basic idea. And I think it's a good argument. To add to your other arguments for the existence of God. But basically, it's, and I talked about this for Crew this last week, but I said, I'll get into it in a minute. So you're basically saying, murder is wrong. Murder is wrong all the time. Every time, all the time. Murder is just wrong, always, right? I don't know. Is this backwards for you guys? It's backwards for me. So murder is always wrong. If murder is always wrong, there has to be something essential to murder that makes it inherently evil. And if atheism is true, And we have just naturally developed in the world of the lions and tigers and bears, killing other critters is not morally wrong. No one seems to have any issue. The lions seem to feel no guilt about eating the gazelle. And it'd be very easy for an evolutionist. And this is why evolution was used. Evolution was used as an argument for slavery and Jim Crow laws and all this kind of stuff, because evolution and atheism they were considered black folks to be less evolved than white folks. This was a very well-known argument that Thomas Jefferson had. Thomas Jefferson was using that logic to argue for slaves just being naturally built for slavery. It was awful. But anyway, so murder, well, we would say, okay, let's say slavery. So murder, slavery, whatever, anything that's evil inherently, we would say it's wrong inherently, because human beings should not kill each other. Human beings should not enslave each other. Human beings should not steal from one another. But if there is something that is inherently wrong about doing these actions, that there's ethics. And if there's ethics, all of a sudden we got to go, okay, well, if there's ethics, there's got to be a moral code. And if there's a moral code, then there has to be something above us that maintains morality. The argument would be that's God. So you have the moral argument. We already had the argument from design, where I talked about the watchmaker arguments, very famous one. And I said about the tree and the bricks. That's the argument from design. There's also some that Thomas Aquinas brought. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll touch on a couple of the more interesting ones. And some of them are just so philosophically deep that it'll just bore you to death. So the one is the unmoved mover. And so this one is pretty basic. The argument is that everything moves into place. Everything is being moved, literally moved from potentiality to actuality. For example, he uses, if I remember correctly, a log. A log has the potential to be on fire, but it is not on fire. You cannot have potential and actuality at the exact same time. It's impossible. It's either is or it isn't, but it's maintained in it. But a log cannot just start on fire. There has to be a movement of some sort. And this is why the unmoved mover and another argument called the first cause kind of blur for most people. And I would just put them together for the sake of the average conversation. So again, it would be the first cause in this situation. So the log is sitting there. Somebody has to light a match to burn the log to start it on fire. That's a movement, or you could say a cause. And in both those cases, something has to move or cause this event to happen in order for the log to start on fire. You back up a little bit more and you go, okay, well then I was born because of my parents having sex and conceiving me and giving birth to me. My parents were conceived. You look outside, you got trees. Well, trees were put there by other trees that had seeds that dropped the seeds. Anyway, their point is you get so far back. So you have we're here right now in human history. Eventually you go far enough back, there has to be an unmoved mover. That's the argument. At some point, there's something that is pure actuality somewhere, just sitting out in the world. Because and then you go back, like, how did we get on Earth? Well, the Earth got knocked around by other planets. Well, how'd the other planets get there? Well, they got knocked around by other things. Well, how'd they get there? Well, there was gas and matter. Well, how'd the gas and matter get there? The point is that the further you think about it, further back you go, you get to a point where you have to have nothing, almost like a nothingness, like just nothing. There's nothing there, because if something is there, then it's eternal. And then how do you explain that? So God would be the first mover. He'd be the unmoved mover. He's the one who started the whole entire thing. There can't be an infinite regress into nothingness. You have to actually have some point where time starts. And God is considered to be the unmoved mover. So that's an argument for the existence of God. There's another argument called the necessary being argument. And this is a very odd, again, today would be a very odd thing. It's a logical argument. So basically everything is possible or necessary. So I exist, and I exist. I am right now existing. It's a necessary thing to say that because I am existing right now. I'm trying to simplify this. I could possibly die though. So I'm not a necessary being. And there are accidents. I have white skin and blue eyes and blondish hair. Those are things that are all accidents to me. They're not necessary to who I am. So anyway, again, I am all the things that I am were possible, but they're not necessary. If I didn't exist, or I wasn't born, or my parents weren't born, or whatever, world keeps spinning because I'm not necessary. Again, the argument would be, you go far enough back and you have to ask the question, why is there not nothing? Why is there not nothing back here? There's something. So there's something that's necessary. There is something that's necessary because not everything can be necessary. Everything at some point was just possible. The earth even was not necessary. The earth is just a possibility among trillions of possibilities. So the argument is, a logical argument again, is not the first mover this time, but that God is the necessary being. God is the necessary thing that originally existed. Very close to the unmoved mover argument, very close to the first cause argument, but he's necessary. But then the big one is the grand designer. I mean, that's really your biggest argument. Being able to look at the world and point to a tree and be able to articulate the importance of a tree and the cross section of the leaves, like I drew up here, that's a really good argument. And then finally, my own personal argument that I've used countless times when I substitute taught, and this is the one I taught for the students for crew this last week. I was doing an apologetics panel. This is the one I've argued before. So I was at a high school in Wisconsin, and the student was saying that spirituality is nonsense, right? And he was saying that he was saying that it's relative. Spirituality is relative. It's whatever you want to believe. That's what he said. So he says, whatever you want to believe is good for you. It's not good for me. But, as long as you believe in something, it's all good. It's all gravy, baby. So I said, let's just think about that. He says, so basically he was saying that's relative. It's relative to each person. It's not necessarily true. You can't say that Christ is the only way to heaven. That's not fair. It has to be, as long as you believe in something. So I said, okay, let's think about that. So we have the physical world, right? So the physical world exists. I don't know how clearly you guys can see that, but that's a physical world. In the physical world, we have H2O, right? H2O is water. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. You can't go, you know what? Any clear liquid really is water. It's not that big a deal, man. Because if you say that, you could be drinking moonshine or ammonia or just straight up turpentine or gasoline. You can't just say, well, you know what? Any clear water, any clear liquid, is just whatever. It's all water, man. It's all water. You don't have any right to tell me that I can't drink this clear liquid that is straight up, rubbing alcohol. It's not the same as water. So in the physical world, well, yeah, truth does matter. It could matter so much that you might die. So it's a big deal. But then there's also an abstract world. And this is a really interesting thing. There's an abstract world. So there's this whole abstract reality, and that is math. And anybody who's ever gone to school will very quickly recognize and have to admit that you can get a math problem wrong. The abstract world has truth. There is, without a doubt, you get 2 + 2 = 6, and somebody's going to mark it wrong. And you could sit there and go, well, on a circular plane or whatever, fine, on a circular plane, but there's still only one answer. Let's just say it's a circular plane then, whatever that means. Or well, in a base 12, okay, fine. But in base 12, the answer is still the answer it is. Just because you can add some other variables doesn't change the fact that once those variables are added and nothing else is added or taken away, there's an answer. And when it comes to base 10 math, basic 2 + 2 = 4. If there are two planets and there's no life to count them, and they come close together, they're 4 planets. Whether or not we can recognize them and point at them, they're still 4. 4 is the same if you go to China or you go to Mexico or you go to Canada. It's 2 + 2 = 4. So now we have physical world, physical truth, abstract world, abstract truth. So I drew these pictures up here, and I didn't draw this though. So I said, okay, so now we have physical truth, abstract truth. And now I'm suggesting that God is the spiritual truth, like Christian God, this idea, or just truth in general. Let's just say truth in general. Like there is a God of some sort. There's truth in the physical world. There's truth in the abstract world. How logically can you say that when it comes to the spiritual world, all of a sudden you have an opinion again? You can have an opinion, but that your opinion is just as valid as anybody else's. If you're being logical, you have to logically, at the very least, infer that if there's truth in every other realm of reality, then there is, at the very least, a very strong likelihood of there being truth in the spiritual world. Because if it's not, then the spiritual world completely defies all logic and reason. And why are we even talking about it? If it defies laws of logic and reason, we can't even discuss it anyway, because our discussions are based upon logic and reason. We can't learn about something that doesn't make any sense. That is illogical. Because how do you discuss it then? So anyway, this is the argument that I've used countless times, and it's always got a good response, because people have to genuinely admit the fact that, well, I mean, logic, again, it is a scientific argument. This is not us pulling the Bible up and going, blindly follow what the Bible says. This is us saying, hey, we're not judging, just saying, if the spiritual world exists, there has to be, I mean, again, logically speaking, it seems very likely that there is truth there, and that Buddhism and Christianity can't coexist. Buddhism is inherently atheistic. Christianity is monotheistic. They can't coexist. They might both have some things right or wrong, but the core and essence of their belief system can't be equally valid. They could be both wrong, but they can't both be right, because truth exists in the spiritual realm. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? There really wasn't much. This was one of the smallest chapters, which is really sad, because I have read I have a graduate degree in Christian apologetics, and I have read books, not kidding you, that thick, just on atheism. So it was just, I was really surprised how short this chapter was. That's why I wanted to add some extra arguments. But anybody have any questions that they'd like me to answer while we're here? Did any of the things I talked about not make sense? I'll happily answer those questions as well. And if you have questions about the book or anything that we've talked about in the past, I'll happily answer those also. All right. Well, we're 15 minutes early. If there are no more questions, I wanted to go through some of the basic arguments for the existence of God. I'll give it another 30 seconds. I know there's a 20-second delay. So if you have questions, now is the time to ask them, because I will happily answer any questions that you have. But otherwise, I'm not going to just stand here and just take your time and just tell you whatever it is I have on my mind, because I have lots of things on my mind at the moment. Give it 20 more seconds. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. I'll see you guys next week. Next week, we'll be doing the topic of Buddhism. And Buddhism is very interesting. And I'll even go out on a limb and say it's only six pages. Okay, so this is one of the easiest books to read because it's so short. Each chapter is so short. I love that about this book. It also gives us a lot of a leeway to talk more about stuff, because they leave out a lot just by necessity. But I have lots of texts on Buddhism, lots of books on Buddhism. And to be honest, if I was not a Christian, I would probably be a Buddhist if I was going to be something. I'm a Christian. I firmly believe in theism. But if I were an atheist, I would probably be a Buddhist, just because some of the stuff just makes a lot of sense, as we'll see. And it's important for us to be honest about about that. It's important, because when I talk to a Buddhist and I say, oh yeah, I could totally be a Buddhist. I'm a theist. I believe in God. So by definition, I can't be a Buddhist because they're atheistic. But then that has offered a lot of great conversations. And I took my wife and kids. I've taken my kids to all kinds of different religious places to allow them to be confronted with some of these other views. And I took my wife and kids to a Buddhist temple a couple of years back. And I let my kids ask all the questions that they had for the Buddhist person there, the monk. And I asked this monk some very specific questions about their, for lack of a better term, theology. And I will tell you his answers to my questions next week, which were very interesting, because they believe in reincarnation. So there's lots of things to discuss there. So anyway, God bless you guys. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I will happily answer them in time. And go to that Mind Matters website and find that arguments for the existence of God are scientific. It's a great little article. You're not going to walk away going, wow, praise Jesus, it's a Christian book or something. But that's not the point. We're trying to just optimize the conversation about the existence of God with our atheist friends. Why do atheists believe in right or wrong if there is no God? That's a great question. And so the average atheist would probably pull from the argument that Freud used. Freud would use the argument that morality itself developed over time as a way to protect us from danger. So, for example, let's say, we're monkeys and we finally come out of the trees and we've developed language as a necessity to try to survive. And what happens is the elder statesmen of the little tribe we're a part of start to hypothesize all kinds of stuff. Like, what is that big, round, shiny thing at nighttime in the sky? What's the big, round, shiny thing in the sky during the day? There's lots of noises and stuff in the woods at nighttime. It's really dark out there, and your mind starts to wander and your imagination gets the best of you. It's also very dangerous at that time. Wild animals would have been killing us. We coexisted with saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths. So that's very scary stuff. So what happened is eventually it got to the point where religion started. So they started to project, okay, well, that's a God. Obviously, it's a God. It's some kind of a supernatural being. But then, as humanity grew, and we had more people, then there was a need for morality. That's what they would argue. They would say, and eventually there comes some kind of a threshold where, if we want to maintain the numbers that we have in a community, and try to maintain peace, morality has to exist. So, for example, if you have even 12 people, if everybody steals, the society is going to fall apart very quickly. It was Immanuel Kant's argument that the argument from morality is if everybody, kind of like if everybody murders everybody, there's only one person left, or everybody's dead. So you can't have everybody murder everybody. If everybody steals, then society as a whole falls apart because no one would trust anybody. So Freud and other atheists would argue that morality came from this necessity to maintain humanity as a people group. And so you don't murder because murder destroys society. You don't steal because stealing destroys society. You don't lie that often because lying is ruins society. And it's interesting that in the Old Testament, when we say thou shalt not lie, Bible doesn't say that. I'm not saying you should lie. I'm not saying that. But it is important at that time period when that was written, the text actually says you shall not bear false witness. Bearing false witness was a court thing. It was a court thing. It had to do with court. And the reason why it mattered so much was because your witness, you saying you saw something happen, could be the difference between life and death for an individual. So if you bore false witness, you could get a murderer off of charges for murder. And if you fabricated evidence, you could cause a person's murder. And that's why, again, this is one of the arguments against the Bible. People are like, well, they were going to kill people for lying. Like, no, they were going to condemn people to death for perjuring themselves, for lying in court, because their testimony hypothetically caused the death of another person, of an innocent person. So they were charged with murder in those situations. So anyway, but it didn't say do not lie. It was talking about do not bear false witness in a court of law. So, these different ideas kind of developed, morality kind of developed over time. And eventually we have the morality we have, and humanity had grown with it for so long. It became an inherent part of our psychology. And now we have morality. We believe that their morals exist. They feel like they exist, even though they don't. But they would, by definition, if you're an atheist, by definition, morality is a human construct, meaning it's created by mankind. Does that answer your question? So now I have to wait for the 20-second delay, and then I have to wait for another 20-second delay for people to write their questions down. But great question. It's a great question, and I don't know how much detail people want. So I could teach an entire doctorate level course on this topic if we really wanted to. But let's be honest, you guys would get bored after a bit. But I'm willing to talk about whatever it is you guys want. Wayne, did that answer your question, man? I'm going to, based upon your silence, I'm going to assume that you're either gone or that you're frantically taking notes. All right, so I'm going to let us go then, unless there's any other questions. I don't see any. So I will see you guys next week. We'll be looking at Buddhism, and Buddhism is a big deal. It's important for us to really take this seriously because we are surrounded by people who are pseudo-Buddhists in this area. In Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, if you look at the demographics, Buddhism is right behind. I did a demographic search just in preparation for the chaplain position at the police department. And it's predominantly Catholic, Protestant, and then you got Muslims, and then Buddhists, and then random other things. But Buddhism is very low. I mean, it's like less than 2%. But if you ask a lot of the atheists or non-believers around, they will tell you oftentimes, I'm very spiritual, and I'm more of a Buddhist, even though they don't know what that means. So it is important to just educate yourself and understand what the basics are. And if somebody drops that on you, like, oh, I'm actually more like a Buddhist, and you could say, hey, well, which of the 4 tenets do you really, find inspiring? Like, what is it about Buddhism that really the four pillars. What is it really? What really kind of strikes you about Buddhism? Anyway, so it's good and important to understand. All right. God bless you guys. I'm going to let you go. Have a great week.